Good afternoon, welcome back. Today I want to talk about these two journals, and there are things that I like and things that I don't like. I was experimenting with a type of binding where the boards are attached by what's called a split board binding, and that is where you sew on tapes and then you have a waste sheet that folds over the tapes and makes a little flange that goes in between two pieces of board, one thicker than the other. And it's supposed to be a fairly strong attachment, and it was something I wanted to play around with. In that attachment, the boards are a little bit away from the shoulder and you end up with something called the French groove. I was also playing around with designing some cover art for half leather bindings. I had this scrap of green that I used on, which was enough to do these two half leather journals where you just cover the spine around and then the corners, but I didn't have enough to do a full leather binding. So the one book that I like the best is this one. This paper went on better than the other one. I did do a fill in, and that's where you put a piece of card after you've put the leather on that's the same thickness as the leather in this space here to bring it up to where you don't have a ridge. There's a little tiny ridge, but because of the way that I collaged this decoration, it's not really visible, and that's why I like this cover better. I've got some glue pieces on here, excuse me. One of the things that I also liked was I did this end paper, this is a piece of book cloth, and your end papers are glued to that. It's supposed to be a very strong joint. I liked the technique. What I didn't like was the paper that I chose to use inside here, which is a type of parchment paper that I had off of Amazon. I hadn't played around with it a lot, and you can see that it likes to cockle when it gets the least bit wet, and you can't really press it out, and you can see all of that here. This little edge here is where the book cloth that you sew through here comes around to this decorative paper. So this was a bit of a fail. So I won't be doing that again. But that's the part about experimenting and being willing to try new things and then take copious notes. I have a book that I just write the notes in so that you can take the parts that you like and ditch the parts that you don't. I used a Victoria Design Voyage paper group along with some On a Whimsical Adventure papers, and kind of intermix it. It's got a little bit of a steampunk vibe to it, but also a seashore or a travel journal kind of thing. And I really liked the way that the pages did turn out. I like the color combination. I thought that worked really well. And so overall, the text block part of this, I was really happy with. It's just that some of the covering part, I know I've got some more to learn. The other thing that I did was, here you can see, I hope, that I colored the edges with some alcohol inks, and I wanted to talk about that just a little bit. This is the alcohol inks that I used, a set of metallics, silver, copper, gold I have, and some colors here. It's a raw umber, which is kind of a walnut brown, red, and blue. And I wanted to show you some things about that. When you're putting it on white paper, which is what the edges of most of your text blocks are going to be, is white paper, you can get a lot of variation depending on whether or not you put these colors by themselves or if you were to layer them. I wish on this particular book, that's so pale there, that I really wish that I had played around more with my colors and layered it. The gold by itself is quite pale, but if you put it over a walnut base, it's a richer kind of looking gold. If you put it over red, it almost looks like the copper. Putting it over blue, it sort of disappears. So I really wish that I had played more around with the brown and did something between these two. This is like 2 or 3 layers of brown. Maybe a light coating of the brown with gold would have made a gold that I would have liked a lot better. So on this particular book, I did a copper, it's just straight copper to the edges, and 3 coats, and it got to be this nice color, which I kind of like. This artwork here was not as interesting or involved, and consequently you can see some of the edges here. Now if this really keeps bugging me a lot, I'll probably do something like take a little piece of trim and just apply it to the top to disguise the part that's bugging me, which is one of the fixes that you could have. The other fix would be to next time, if I wanted to use this little part of the image, to put more layers on the background. This is layered up collage in Photoshop, and I really needed to have this be a little bit busier to disguise those areas. Or I guess the other possibility would be to have used a little bit thicker paper, but this is 32-pound presentation matte paper, and other than a photo paper which would not have bent over the edges very well, I don't really have a thicker paper that I can print on and get the detail that you get here. So there's compromises however you go. One of the things that between the books that I was learning is that this is called a hollow back spine, and what that means is that you glue a tube onto the spine, and then the leather is not actually adhered to the spine of the book. It just goes into the tube, and this allows the book to lay open flat. Well, I was having problems on a previous book that I've had for a number of years, and I was noticing that after I opened and closed it a whole lot, right here in the corners you could start to see that the tube was pulling away from the spine with the stress. And it's probably because I didn't get the best adhesion that you can get across the spine. So I was researching that and saw that a lot of people use these little weighted bags. So when they glue in the tube to the spine, they let it dry overnight, and they lay these little puppies on there, which holds it really tight to the spine. And I have like 5 of these. And that leads to the better adhesion. I have no pull away from the corners at all with this. How did I make these? I had these little linen bags. You're supposed to put potpourri or something in them. And all I did was I bought a big canister of BBs. And I put the BBs in some little Ziploc bags that you use for like jewelry items. And I did that so that if there was any glue or whatever, I wouldn't get them wet and they wouldn't rust. And I just put them in there and then sewed this little bag closed, but not completely closed, so I can't, if something happens, my bag in there ruptures or whatever, I can open it up and reuse it. But I was able to make 6 of these bags out of one jar of BBs. It was about like that. So that is something that I learned to do. The inside of this book, I don't like the way I should have had that same sewn on book cloth that would have molded into this a lot better than this paper wanted to do. So I don't like the way these end papers turned out. This didn't cockle. This is a better paper. You can see here when it was glued to the end paper, it doesn't have all those little wrinkles that the other one did. So this part of it was better. This part was worse. So something learned there. This is a Nick the Booksmith title page, but most of this is from digital kits that I own from Ephemera's Vintage Garden, from On a Whimsical Adventure, and Victoria Designs Watercolor Forest. And once again, I liked the soft greens and blues that are in this. It reminds me a lot of the mountains where I live, and it's just a really sweet writing journal to have on hand. So that is something I wanted to share. Like I said, there are good parts and bad parts whenever you're experimenting. My next adventure is going to be doing a bridle binding to see how that compares to this. It also has this pretty French groove that I like, and it has a little bit different kind of end paper, and I will see out of all of these, one day I'm going to discover that kind of binding that I think is my favorite go-to one. Hope you keep trying and experimenting. It's a wonderful hobby, and I'll see you soon.